the audience that we're going to get pretty technical, okay?
Okay, sure.
So this is going to get pretty deep.
HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Boolean logic, what would you consider that?
True or false? If this, then that.
Was there one? Is there glue in there? I have no freaking idea and I don't care. How does a page actually load? Because it doesn't just show up, does it?
Well, this could be a little bit controversial. You're right, you don't want to be a gatekeeper, I guess. But at the same time, I don't know if I think that it's necessary that we proliferate a whole bunch of crappy sites.
The vast majority of people that design web pages do not understand this. What advice would you have for tradies wanting to get a website?
I think a lot of people are caught out.
When it comes to designing your website, there is a difference between a web designer and a web developer. But which one should you choose, or should you choose any of them at all? Well, in this podcast, I interview Stuart, who's recently transitioned from being a tradie to a web developer. We talk about all things web design, which platforms you should use and why. Stuart's also got some interesting perspectives about the trade industry and how you might want to transition from somebody who is a tradie into another career. I had heaps of fun with Stu, and I cannot wait for you to listen to this podcast. Enjoy. Stewie, welcome to the casting couch.
Thanks for having me. Casting couch? No, let's not call it that. Surely you got a better name than that.
Chesterfield edition.
That's nice. The setting's nice.
Stewie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. So today, I wanted to go straight into it from a developer's perspective.
Okay.
Which you are, and don't tell me you're not.
Okay. We'll add caveats to that later.
I want to give you one word.
Okay.
And I want to know what comes to your mind straight away.
We're doing the inkblot thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Go, run it by me.
Hello, world.
Oh, well, it's like everybody's introduction to every language they've ever learned, right? That's the first thing you write. You learn JavaScript, you do that. You learn Visual Basic, you do that. It's like your first tutorial is Hello World is the first thing you ever output in programming. Is that right? That
is right, yeah. And I do believe there is some history to it where the first person that ended up putting a web page on it, that's what he wrote was Hello World. And I'm screwing that up like terribly, but there is something to that, which is why I remember doing my first code going, why am I writing Hello World? This is so bizarre.
Yeah.
So Stuart, you are a jiu-jitsu master.
No,
yes.
You cannot say that on camera. No.
No.
I love jiu-jitsu, I'm passionate, but no, I'm not a master. And anyone, you'll get me killed, honestly. I'd be murdered. Anyone who saw it, they'd be like, oh, I know that guy. No, he's not.
You are a jiu-jitsu novice
yes,
at best?
And a jiu-jitsu enthusiast.
Enthusiast?
Yeah, that's it.
You are a tradie.
Yeah, I spend most of my time in the trades, and I still do DC electrical contracting now to make ends meet. Yep.
Yeah, but more recently, your gig has been coding or learning to code and implementing code on websites more recently.
Yeah. That's I guess have always worked in the trades, worked in communications, DC electrics. Really like it. It's anything like that that's really systematic. It appeals to me. My brain's very linear. So it's always been the way that I've liked to do things. And yes, I quit that job. I have tried to learn. I've always done a little bit of programming in that role. There's always been crossover with stuff. You did more in your industrial stuff with PLCs and that type of thing, but we were doing really low-level Boolean logic with, most recently, fire panels. That was the thing. Just what do I do with an input? How do I direct my outputs? Very, very sanitized, very pared back languages, built around C, but super basic, no control, like can't declare new variables really. You have some basic IO.
What's just for the audience, Boolean logic, what would you consider that to be?
True or false? If this, then that. Basically, if this input is true or on or one, lots of different ways, but very binary, even binary is probably not a very good way to explain that concept. But true or false?
True or false.
If it's true, then do this.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what you were limited to. You couldn't do a lot of, you can do some conditional stuff and get a little bit squirrely with that type of thing, but not the type of stuff that you might do with a really open language like Python. So, yeah.
So you've come a long way. Obviously, we've been mates for a while. So you've come a long way from where you originally were. When I met you, you were working at Telstra.
Yeah. I
started as a Telstra tech?
Yeah, I started as just a basic like service delivery tech, going and putting modems in homes. And from there, I kind of learned about DC electrics with telephone lines. It was my first sort of entry. And we didn't do a lot with them. They're a simple system, and we were designed to keep them within simple constraints. So we weren't doing very extensive stuff, but that was my first sort of dip my toe into electronics, and how those systems worked. And from there, went into working on HFC, or the coax, the RG6 network, and then fibre optics, and involved in rollouts of NBN and stuff at a low level, not high level, but rolling them out, a couple of different fibre systems that Telstra had as well, that they were sort of proprietary. And then from there, I left Telstra after a while and got a job doing more electrical stuff, DC 24 volt systems, doing fire alarms. And that was kind of where programming picked up for me a bit more. I'd done scripting and more basic stuff, but it wasn't part of my job at Telstra. And once I was doing fire alarms, it was more necessary we had to program all the I/O for the system, to sort of fit whatever the design was that came from either the architect or ourselves, depending on what was going on. And that kind of opened my eyes, and I was like, yeah, I remember why I like this.
Yeah.
That's, I got to where I am now because I want to teach more jiu-jitsu, and I needed a job that I could work around that service. Me as a service isn't going to make that happen, but programming, do it from home, it's just a laptop.
Why don't we go back to like being a tradie?
Okay.
Well, you obviously mentioned that you transitioned because you wanted to get a bit more flexible.
Yeah.
Where do you see the current state of trades at the moment? Do you think there is a transition? Obviously, I know that you didn't have the most luck with your employer at the time, is trying to, help you transition. Do you see a need for employers to actually now start to be a bit more flexible within the trades? Because it's traditionally just been, 7:34, make sure you're working your ass off and you get a half-hour break.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a need and necessity for that?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, personally, I absolutely think that the trades are going to have to evolve with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It is no longer the case that like your whole digital life exists 24 hours a day, right? And people are responding to emails at 1 a.m. I mean, that's an extreme case, but you get it. You get stuff from people from work. I don't understand how the trades could remain insulated and everyone remain happy. If there was one part of their life that can't fit in with the other bits, everything else can become flexible and happen at any time. I found it really difficult to understand why I couldn't make my job flexible as well. A lot of what I did was, sites where I could come and go at different times. Some of the work I did could have been done at any time of day. Administrative stuff can absolutely be done remotely. It's tricky to manage expectations for people who've done things a certain way their whole life.
I think that's the point, maybe where we are at the moment, is that institutional culture that we've got in trades. Particularly, you would say the majority of people owning businesses or large enough businesses to employ a significant amount of people would be older. So they've probably come up saying, well, this is the way it was. Yeah. So you have to do it too. Yeah. Why do you get to have the flexibility?
Yeah. There's definitely, it's really hard. And partly I'd be cautious about the way I talk about it, because for some people, certainly got the sense that there wasn't really a good reason other than, well, I had to do it. Which, other people, I'd be more generous in my assessment. But for some people, it felt a little bit like, well, I didn't get that, why would you?
Yeah. For
some people, it seemed like they were actually thinking about it and looking at, well, it's a big challenge because you need changes across really the whole sector. But it does worry me that you get the main way to solve our problem about not being able to do something on time is to just expect that everyone will just work whatever is required. Yeah. I just don't see that being sustainable.
And you've seen it in the corporate world. Yeah. Traditionally they're like, well, you get 9 to 5. Yep. But how productive have you been in that period? Oh, yeah. I've seen tradies just fuck around on site for 4 hours a day. Yeah. What does it matter if you're putting in productivity? I suppose we need to find metrics to measure those things.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That book, I think you put me onto Lean Startup, right?
Yeah.
And he has some great stuff about vanity metrics. If you're not measuring the right thing, you have no idea what you're doing anyway.
Yeah.
You're not getting a good picture of what your output is. And you're exactly right. If you don't measure the right things, well, it looks great to have everyone there from 8 till 5.
Yeah.
Okay, did anything get done from 2 till 5? Like, what's the...
Exactly right.
You're exactly right, yeah.
Despite that, you've been able to move on.
Yeah.
And now you are part-time sort of learning a lot of coding. You are getting... So I dabbled into coding. I could do some PLC programming, which I would not consider to be coding.
Okay. Yep.
But you have been able to sort of build up to a point where you are actually being able to execute programs and do all sorts of stuff on a coding level. To what point now do you think that you're going to be able to monetize this skill? You know, and what does it look like? Because for tradies, this is probably not something that they're going to get into. But for you, what does it look like as a coder to go ahead and now monetize that skill?
So one of the really big challenges that I've had is because of, like, I've got a family and stuff, I've had to do this pretty insulated from going to an institution and getting given an education. So I've done everything open source, some stuff on Udemy, the Odin project, which is awesome, and other stuff, but all on my own. I haven't had an entry point. So one of the things I'm trying to be careful of is having a really clear picture in my head about how to make money in an industry that I don't know from the inside.
Yeah.
The short answer is, it seems to me like the best way right now is to do basic websites for people, because JavaScript is the language I'm learning, most familiar with, can do a pretty good job in. But I don't know I don't have a good picture of where does a JavaScript developer go to land a big job, right? Whose frameworks are. And so I'm sort of messing around there to try and find some GitHub, to find open source projects to start to build some contacts and a network. LinkedIn didn't seem that great for me. It was a little bit too separate. The people are disjointed from different organizations. So I think an open source way is going to be how I figure that out. And
an open source project is a project that anybody can contribute to.
Or try to.
You
can ask, you can get involved, but your code has to be accepted. So that's my big next goal, is to get a piece of code accepted to someone else's project.
So for those that just have no idea about coding, GitHub is...
It's an online database, a way to store files and manage your version control. It's the database, the cloud storage, effectively.
And for many pieces of code or programs, a lot of programs would exist on GitHub that actually get used in the real world.
100%. Yeah. Lots and lots. Yeah. In fact, it's a way that a lot of people support their application, web application. They get people to write code. They crowdsource it and keep it running. Bugs are fixed that way. Typos are fixed that way. You can get really... true. So reading articles about how to get an entry. Open source seems like a really good way, because your code has to pass a test, which is the people who wrote the original code are going to say, that fixes our problem, and it's written in an acceptable manner, and the syntax matches what the rest of our database code base looks like. So that's a big goal, but it may be that you literally fix a typo or add documentation or make some other really minor edit to literally just the human readability rather than how the machine passes. So
JavaScript is the main language you've been using, coding language.
Yes.
Can you break down, so you've been getting into a bit more web development, because I think that's definitely a way that you can monetize those skills, coding skills.
Yeah.
There are
it seemed that way to me.
Other ways of making programs with that code. But can you break down the fundamental types of languages that you would use on a web page and what they actually do? Yeah,
cool. You're exactly right. JavaScript was my entry point for that reason, because it is one of the core web technologies. So you've got basically three languages that are used on a web page: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML are the elements on the page. It's not considered, this could be a little bit controversial. HTML, CSS, not really considered programming or coding languages.
That is controversial, Stewie.
Controversial. Well, it's not that's just how it is. Yeah. CSS a little bit more. It does do behavior, but not...
Explain that a bit more.
So HTML are just elements. It describes the parts of the page that are going to come up. CSS, your style sheets, are way that those elements are going to look, be styled.
It's the look and feel, the colours,
yes.
the border width and all that stuff.
Exactly, and some basic animations. So you can add little bits of behaviour is anytime things are changing. So data is things and behaviour is actions. Anytime things are changing, which CSS can do a little bit of. And it's really important for responsive design too. People using frameworks now, which I haven't done a lot of, but CSS, you're adding conditional statements that change the way the website appears as you change the width, which is obviously, if you're on a phone, it's going to be different width to a desktop.
And that's called responsive design.
Yeah. And you can do a pretty good job of that just with HTML and CSS. So the two of those together, you can make a pretty nice looking web page. JavaScript is concerned with making things do things. If you click a button and it has to go to a database and bring back some information, JavaScript will be the language that does that. So they're the three languages that go together and make the web work effectively in your browser.
I want to throw another word test at you. WordPress.
Well, okay, I've thought about this a lot because you do a lot in WordPress and people ask me to do stuff in WordPress. And so this is a little bit like when, or for me, the analogy I came up with was like when Apple phones, there were a lot of people who picked up an iPhone and were like, well, I don't like this because a lot of the stuff is hidden. Part of the problem I have with WordPress is everything's abstracted behind this layer of like just a wall of divs, man. Working out how things are built, it just blows me. Anyway, but so much
Divi
of the stuff.
is your favourite.
I don't want to talk about Divi. I tried to find one element in that and I was lost for days. It's a good idea. It just feels like so hard to. If I want to make one change, it may be impossible based on your theme for me to make that happen. Whereas when I'm building with I can build a website with 3 files in my, and I can see everything and I can edit it. So CMS, so much is abstracted behind WordPress builders and themes and everything that it makes it very difficult for me to know where it went wrong. And I don't like that.
So you're getting in the ring with the vast majority of websites on the internet. Because WordPress is the main platform that people use to build websites.
Which was demoralising to figure out later down the track. And realise that, oh my goodness, I can't just make an edit to this file that I can read. I'd spent a fair bit of time at that point figuring out how to put, the fundamentals of JavaScript anyway. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert, right? I haven't been doing this very long, but I can sort of work my way through and this function calls that function. Now I know how that gets to there and you can follow the chain. I know what variable got set, blah, blah, blah. Well, then you get to WordPress. I can't do it the same way. It doesn't make it, I just can't figure it out.
So for you, I like to use the analogy of a house. I've been thinking about this too, right?
Sure.
So from where you come from, your angle, if you're building a web page, right, you're essentially, if you were to make a wall as a chippy, you would have all the single pieces of timber, you would make the studs, you'd make the bottom plate, you'd make noggins, top plates, you'd lift that wall up, and then you would put the plaster on. So we're styling now, we've got CSS on there, right? And then we paint it, that is you. You're doing all of that from the ground up. Yeah? Myself and web designers in general, you're getting a prefabricated wall that comes off the back of a truck, right? I don't care how it was made, right? But you literally lift it in, you put it on there, and that's it. We still have to put the plaster on. The plaster still goes on. We still paint, but I honestly couldn't tell you what nails were put into that stud. Were they screws? Was there one? Is there glue in there? I have no freaking idea, and I don't care. And I think this is the problem you're getting at.
100%. I just can't see how it was built. And it's the same problem if you ever went to somewhere, and you would have done this a million times, someone else cabled a job, right? Okay. Now you go there to diagnose it. The first thing you do is try and work out how it was cabled. Because if you don't know where the junctions are, you don't know which one's full of water, which one's high resistance, whatever it is. I try and solve problems the same way. All right, well, what's it meant to look like first? And man, if I can't work, depending on what builder you use, like Elementor versus Divi, they seem to have fundamentally different, not fundamentally, they roughly speaking, seem to encapsulate things in something that they can put a unique class or ID on so that they can do some stuff to it later. But the actual steps that it took to do that, or do you know what I mean? When you don't know someone's design intent, it's really hard to know, well, what should I change to make it work the way I want it to work? I hated it.
I should have warned the audience that we're going to get pretty technical, okay?
Okay, sure.
So this is going to get pretty deep.
Okay, as deep as we can go for a beginner anyway.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm a beginner.
We're already pretty deep, right?
Sure.
And for those that aren't into web pages, they might not be too interested into it. But it's interesting to note how they're constructed,
Yeah.
so that if a tradie was to engage someone for a web page,
Yeah.
you might have some knowledge behind you to say, well, do you know, is this fast, and potentially why it's fast or why it's not, and things like that, right? So, if you can just draw any little nuggets out of this. So you mentioned Elementor and Divi.
Sure.
Right. So for those that aren't familiar with what they are, can you explain them? And maybe you can ask me.
You will probably have a better job of
Yeah.
explaining it. My very basic level understanding is they're a block builder, which you drag and drop elements and it constructs in the background the code. That's as far as I got with it because I didn't need to know anything more, right?
Yeah.
You would have a better understanding of how they work. I haven't messed with them. I know roughly how they can break the site if I disable certain things, and that's about it, right? So you're of much higher authority. Yeah. Can you tell me the difference between them?
So WordPress is kind of an interesting platform compared to your website builders.
Sure.
So we'll put website builders aside from WordPress, which your website builder would be Wix,
Yes.
Trade Magnet, what I sell as well, that's a website builder.
Sure.
It's got a lot of their own code associated with it.
Yep.
And all their UI and builder, you can't change anything. It is what it is, right?
Yep.
WordPress is open source, essentially. It's free, except it needs to be hosted. So we put it on a computer, a server somewhere.
Yep.
And then because it has very basic functionality, it was essentially designed as a blogging platform.
Yeah.
Back in the early 2000s is when it was kind of made. Don't quote me on that. But it was when it was popularized, right?
Sure.
So it has very basic visual block builders inside of it. It's called Gutenberg Block Builder, which is what essentially is the main builder that comes with it. And that's how you make the pages, and then the theme is the look and feel. Essentially, you're styling. There's some back-end stuff that it does, but the theme kind of styles the whole website for you.
So up to this point, these are all things that I kind of had read about and followed when I got a couple of questions, got to here, and the Gutenberg builder, and I got kind of optimistic because I was like, oh, this looks like I'll be able to affect the HTML here, which I think you can if it's been built that way, which then you go on to your next bit, right?
So the Gutenberg block builder has not traditionally been the best block builder. In fact, it's been like, there's a lot of jokes out there and memes about how terrible it is.
Sure.
Okay. So some entrepreneurial businesses had come along and said, well, we can make a better visual block builder for WordPress. So you install this, and it's, like I said, it's a visual block builder where web designers can come on and essentially design the site without knowing any code, really. And they offer a lot more things like widgets, which are blocks of code that display, you might be your Google review widgets and stuff like that, sliders and all sorts of stuff. Right, so that's what an Elementor or a Divi does. They're just different companies that are doing that. Not one is better than the other, although after chatting with you, and I won't just say it's Divi, there are other ones out there. I think Beaver Builder is another one. There's a ton of different ones out there, right? But essentially what they're doing is that to make it easier for the designer, they're having to create a lot more containers or code, and they're bloating the system essentially. So that's why you aren't a big fan. Also, you can't really access the back-end code.
No. You're right. It's not, you can understand why it happens, because in order to do it without me actually affecting the code, if you want to attach behavior to something, I have to build the elements in a constrained way so that I know how to find them in the DOM and how to move them around and how to scale them and all that sort of stuff. So you can see why they do it. It's actually very clever to be able to, all that back end is constructed without, as you said, any knowledge. It's very clever when you think about it like that. But you can see why open source becomes so good, right? Because as soon as there's IP involved, they're like, well, we don't want to show you how it works.
Yeah.
So then if I want to make a small change to something, it can be very tricky to, which we found. I can't remember what it was. The first one was easy because you could attach a class. There was something else we tried to do, and
we were just changing images when we click a box.
Right.
Yeah, and we would be able to change an image, so we connected the two. Yeah.
But we weren't able to attach the event handler, which again, people aren't probably going to be interested in that, but we couldn't actually find the element that we wanted at the right place in the stack to be able to attach the event at the right time. We couldn't make alterations to that because it's constructed by the builder.
Correct,
and we weren't able to implement it. So on the one hand, I got a fair bit of, like, a lot of time and effort went into making these block builders, and they're clever. They are clever. I have to respect that. But to work on them, I don't like that. Because I don't want to do it that way. I want to do things in a smaller, more targeted way.
Yeah. And so I did mention that it was open source WordPress, essentially.
Yeah.
You can get into the back end of, inside of WordPress, you can see the code for the theme. You can see the code for a lot of the plugins, so we can go into plugins as well. But essentially the block builders are like closed doors.
That's right, exactly. And that's the bit I ran into that I really didn't like. Once you got to there, you can't follow the thread any further. Once that's abstracted away from you, it's all fine and very clever and works really well as long as you want to do it the way that it was designed to work.
Exactly.
And
yeah. So it's frustrating. It's kind of a necessity to have these block builders for WordPress, because otherwise we wouldn't have this proliferation or the ease to be able to create these websites. Unless you're paying a lot of money for developers.
No, look, I don't know, if you want to be a real, I guess, you're right, you don't want to be a gatekeeper, I guess. But at the same time, I don't know if I think that it's necessary that we proliferate a whole bunch of crappy sites. Like, make stuff work, man. Make stuff work right.
Okay, so you said crappy sites. So what would then be the benefit of essentially you building a website from scratch and then me going in, spinning up a WordPress website and then using Elementor, all the other stuff? Like, what is the difference? Why is it so bad?
I guess the one thing that sort of jumped out at me when I started, actually the one that really got to me, you sent me the Lighthouse report from one of the projects that I just thrown up. And admittedly, it wasn't huge, but it had images, it was loading stuff, but I hadn't even tried and it scored really high.
You did well.
And I'm not, sorry, I'm not trying to say like it. What I meant was the site was fast because I had been working with the developer console to sort of look at the layout in different modes and screen sizes. I'd made sure the buttons weren't too small, little things like that, right? And my experience with other block builders, in particular a website that someone had done on Wix, it hadn't guided the person to make it accessible.
Yeah.
It at all. And the site was ranking so poorly, which this person has no understanding of the internet or the technologies behind it. They've got a block builder, which has made something that kind of looks good on their desktop, probably, because you wouldn't do it on your phone, it'd be too much hard work. And it's ranked so poorly. So then I worked on this thing for a few hours, threw it up on, no CDN, no nothing, not serving the
CDN for the
content delivery network. So you're just getting whatever server it's sitting on, probably somewhere in the States or something, I don't know.
Essentially takes an image of your website, puts it on a server somewhere.
Right, to try and deliver it faster.
Yeah.
But which is really a user experience thing, which Google's interested in. And so you make these sites with only the elements that you actually need to deliver what you're trying to make show in front of a user, and it ranks really highly all of a sudden, surprise, surprise. So it didn't have to paint all these other things and find it and then adjust it and whatever. And I think that's the main benefit to me. But that's coming from a purely sort of performative aspect.
Yeah. But that's exactly what I see as a web designer on my end, is that essentially I can create, and I will try and optimize when I create. On my website, I've got a video image that shows up a loop, right?
Yep.
It's super small.
Sure.
Super small, and it's a type of file that will only be rendered on certain devices and things as well.
Okay.
Right. So I have that in mind, but just the construction of the website, the web pages, the blocks, does limit the speed and performance. I just cannot get it to perform as well as what I was looking at yours off the bat. And what we're talking about here is like loading. If you were to search in your search bar my website and have it get delivered from where it's sitting on a server somewhere, the hosting provider, it's no way that it's going to be able to perform like yours, right? But there are tricks that web developers use, like caching.
Yeah.
Right? So there's caching plugins, or things that you can put in WordPress, and essentially that creates some sort of image of the page, right? That's going to be more easily accessible on the first view that you see it, and then might sort of render different elements as you go through.
Yeah.
Those type of things.
Well, so can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Right? What's your experience with caching plugins? Has it been net positive? Have you found them very useful?
More recently, I have.
Okay.
Right.
I
So
hope you knew my question was loaded. Yeah.
I've done a lot of work only because I had a client that I got their website and it was performing terribly.
Sure.
So Divi, built with Divi.
Okay.
Right?
Can I ask you, should we be naming things? Like, are we going to get...
No.
Okay, sure.
No.
All
Divi,
I
they
suppose
can
Divi
get
should have
stuffed.
done better.
Yeah. I think we can put these under all block builders, right?
Sure. Good,
But-
so we can broaden the net of people that want to see you. Sure.
I think though that this was potentially more on the developer side because there is a huge chunk of CSS that gets loaded in the head.
Yeah.
And we would talk about head, body, footers if you want. But when I got it, I was like, okay, they've already got a plugin for caching. I'm going to try and implement that. And it worked quite well. Turns out that it's like a paid version of it, enterprise version that was running out because, of course, their agency had left. So I'd been doing some digging into some different caching platforms to use and why I might use it over some others. So I'd had some more success with some of these caching platforms, but it really does depend. So I think, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I think a lot of web developers will use these caching plugins, just use the default stuff, and then go, that's it. That's all I need, and that's perfect, right? But it wasn't until I, speaking more with you, learning a bit more about how content loads, where I would select certain things to be loaded over others using these plugins. And that's what I was looking for in these caching plugins, particularly like JavaScript execution. Right. So when it gets happened. So can you fill in the blanks as to why that would matter about loading from head, body, footers? How does a page actually load? Because it doesn't just show up, does it?
No, it doesn't. You got it. Your HTML kind of sets up all the things that are going to come in, and you have to link the other sites in the head, effectively. Not other sites, the other files that are going to be used. And that can be quite a big tree for big sites. There might be a lot of other scripts, particularly if it's a modular project where you've had different people work. I mean, again, I haven't worked in like a multi-team deployment, right? But to make that work, you have different people write different things. There may be more than one file that gets loaded. There might have been stuff done later, different behaviors. They can be, I mean, I kind of doubt that any person who writes code ever loads blocking behavior in the HTML early in the file. But there are different ways to load those elements, and your HTML is how the page the elements on the page. But those links at the top, if you put them in the head and you say a JavaScript file and you don't, have the right attributes on that, it's going to block the rest of the behavior. So your page essentially stops loading while it goes and gets this other file, builds its adds it to the DOM and works out what's going on, and then moves down the rest of the HTML. If you've written your page poorly, which, as you said, when people inject code, they sometimes do it at the wrong place or to the wrong element, right? And it can be blocking. So the rest of the page can't continue loading until that has finished. And for computers, that's not a lot of time when you think about going to a server overseas maybe and getting a file and whatever. But for a human, an extra second on the load time, studies have shown that results in less conversions.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, and they're metrics that Google looks at,
100%.
essentially.
Yeah.
So if your website is slower because you've got a chunk of code that sits in the head, because that's what's loading first, yeah?
Yeah.
So your head loads,
Yeah.
yeah, and then the body.
Yep.
And then
Well, it's yes, because that file's written that way, but it's more just it loads top to bottom.
Okay, right.
So it passes the file. Your head is first, it's written above it, the body in the HTML.
Yeah.
But you don't really think about it as like head first, then body. It's going to pass your HTML file top to bottom, like all passes. At each point where there's a blocking behavior, it has to stop until it passes the next part of the HTML.
Okay.
Yes, head is above body in the
Yeah,
HTML tag,
yeah.
but yes.
Essentially, is it, because you've got prioritizing blocks of code too, so you could have certain different JavaScript scripts that sit in the head,
Yes.
and each one of those prioritized inside there as well? Because I've seen...
Depending on how you write the tags,
Okay.
so you can do them asynchronously, or you can defer, which is the way that they recommend writing, and it's what I write with my text. So it'll load the file, but it won't try and pass anything until after the HTML is done. So at the end of HTML, you get DOM content loaded, which is like all the elements are in the DOM tree, and then if you've deferred your JavaScript, then that gets passed. So your page is painted for the user, and then it starts doing the behavior.
Okay.
Whereas if you do it the other way around, you can prioritize them differently by asking them to be passed at different times. If you don't write any change of behavior and just leave a default JavaScript tag, it'll bring it in and pass the script and then continue painting.
Right, okay.
And
how big's that script?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good question. And what if there's an API call?
Yeah.
I don't know. Depending on how your behavior is written, it might not care. It might wait for the returned value. So,
An API, for those that might not know?
Application programming interface. That might be how you get your data from a database, or how you authenticate, or any number of different behaviors that are done by another server somewhere, and you've gone to get something from them.
Yeah. So, knowing... it all sounds reasonably complicated, right? So for somebody that just wants a website, they're probably like, well,
why do I care?
Of course, why do I care, right?
That's the reason they pay someone else.
Yeah, right. I think it's really poignant to understand that the vast majority of people that design web pages do not understand this. They don't have a good understanding of how the structure of websites. They just design and build them, and that's just a product of where we are in the market, because we've got tools that are so easy to create websites with, right?
Yeah. That's kind of why I grimaced when you said necessary about the block. Because, you're right. That has made it very accessible, which is a really good thing, because you don't want it to be, a really high barrier to entry for just a person who needs a landing page, a single page to get their name out there, right? You don't want a high barrier, but it has, without any knowledge of the background, exactly like you say, complicated things in a different way.
Exactly. And that's when people come to me and they do want a landing page for something. Often I'll just use Trade Magnet for that.
Yep.
Particularly it's just for a campaign that they're running for a few months or something.
Sure.
They're probably never going to spin it up ever again. Like, it doesn't need to have SEO, anything like that on it. Just needs to deliver from an ad or something, right?
Yeah.
So on the SEO side...
Just a question I have. How long does it take you using a block builder to build that, lay it out, get it working, get it deployed?
On WordPress, or
in your, like, say you're doing your landing page on Trade Magnet, whatever CMS, or I'm assuming that's WordPress, is it? Still WordPress?
Yeah.
It's not a different block builder.
No, Trade Magnet. Yeah, totally different block builder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's got anything to do with WordPress at all. So it'd be akin to like
a
Wix, something like that.
Okay,
yeah,
understood.
Yeah.
Similar structure and...
Wix is what I would say is a very easy way to design. And actually it's fairly robust, still has the legacy of
a block builder.
Right?
Yeah.
So Trade Magnet is the same, but it's more along the lines of a ClickFunnels, if you know what that is.
No idea.
So anyway, similar block builder. But how long would it take me to deploy? It depends on how big the landing page is, but anyway.
Something like that project I sent you the other day. About 1.5 to 2 of your view height with some information and maybe a little bit of a slider or something, just to whatever.
Like if I was just cruising, maybe 3 hours, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, before
Because
it's deployed straight.
what's interesting to me is I was wondering whether the reason they had initially become so prolific was because of efficiency, right? But that's how long it took me to build that project I sent you.
Yeah, isn't
So
that
it's not
fascinating?
yeah. Yeah.
So really, for me, it's more just the barrier to understanding code.
Yeah, that makes
Because
sense.
you understand it, right?
Yeah.
And even to the point where I've asked you to come on and do some custom stuff coding.
Yep.
I understood the fundamentals of what we were doing, but absolutely could not write it. So I think that's where you're at currently, is that you're able to now write these things that others just simply cannot.
Yeah, it feels weird to say, man. Look,
But you can.
yeah, but like I said before when you said developer, right? Caveat, I'm not self-taught, but I've been learning from open source stuff on my own in isolation from anybody else until I started
That's the
collaborating with
definition
you.
of self-taught, by the way.
I didn't figure it out myself then, right? It wasn't by, I guess, not experimentation. I had someone, honestly, the Odin project, for anyone who's going to do the same thing I did, I would highly recommend starting there because of their workflow. It's a really good, it's open source. It is super useful. So I feel it feels rude to me to say self-taught, right? Because they support a really good environment, which is super, super detailed and gives you start working in GitHub from like the hello world stage, right?
Yeah, right.
Which is great. So it sets you up for success, honestly. But I am still a beginner in that.
Yeah.
So it feels weird to me to sort of, I know you said that a couple of times, like people can't do this. Lots of people can, but they don't really work in the consumer space, I don't think. I think they work on big banking apps and stuff, right? Background
right.
logic,
Yeah.
right? It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a gap in the market. I don't really know.
So from that perspective, we were talking about monetizing before. You know, do you think that there is a place for you to be writing up custom codes on a WordPress or just, other website and stuff like that?
Yes, I think there is. There's a couple of easy things. WordPress has allowed for custom CSS, which is, I think, an easy way to get involved. It just feels like I guess it's so, when you're doing these, like you start learning this, it's really basic and you don't really expect that people are going to pay you to go and do that. It literally can be, what did we write for you? 3 lines or 4 lines of code to get that change done?
Yeah.
And as I said before, controversial opinion, most people are going to tell me you can't call CSS code, right?
Yeah.
Markup or, anyway. I don't want to get into that, but.
I would say this is akin to like a lot of tradies out there that would say, me building a wall is so dumb and stupid because I've done it a million times and it is so freaking easy.
Yeah.
But you know how to do it. You know?
Yeah.
I know how to wire a PowerPoint with my eyes closed.
Yeah.
But people don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They don't know how properly the nuances behind it.
So I think that I think the really smart way to get involved with WordPress for me would be to learn PHP, which is putting me off because it's effectively another language that I have to learn.
Oh, well, we'll stop you there because we were talking about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, PHP. Where does that sit in the whole world?
My understanding is that WordPress is built on PHP.
Yes,
it's the behavior language.
Yeah.
What I believe I can do, what I know I can do from my research is write JavaScript and have it as, imported into a PHP to parse it all. Sorry, not a PHP, that's a very... I can write PHP that references JavaScript. So I can do most of my heavy lifting in JavaScript and have that imported and then run that as plugins.
Yeah.
What I haven't done is worked out how to do that and how it integrates with that. I also don't know, the thing that's limited me is because I'm still trying to learn this other thing, I haven't wanted to put a lot of effort into figuring out how universal it is. Because if you've used, say, Elementor versus Divi, is my plugin even compatible? And do I have to know how both of them work? I don't, so this is you're right, that probably is the right place for me to enter. Yeah. Because I think there's demand for it. But without being able to inspect that the way that I do one of my, a more traditionally built website, which is kind of funny because when I was at school, kids were doing this in IT, right, doing HTML. I mean, JavaScript wasn't really big back then, but people were working out how to do this. So I feel a bit silly even talking about it, frankly.
No.
Anyway,
it's fine.
Working out what the interface is between Divi and Elementor is almost impossible for me to know the design intent. So then I so far have thought, well, I don't want to go down this whole road of like, how do I build a plugin so it's compatible across all the block builders? Or do I have to build it and then convert it to compatible? So the whole thing has been like, I'm going to park that for now.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the next step, but I haven't really wanted to stop what I'm doing, take my head out of it and learn PHP in order to kind of implement those things.
Yeah.
Plus they seem, because of the way that's built, it seems very narrow. You build a plugin for a feature.
Yeah. Specific thing.
Right. And the problem with that is it's like, how big's the market? Well, now we've opened up this whole thing. I've got to figure out a market for a plugin, and then I've got to write the plugin. So
You just want to write code, baby.
that's right. I just want to make things do things. That's it. That's all. I've said before, I'm a robot. But it's interesting. Yeah, that probably is the place to go.
Yeah.
Honestly.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about plugins? Because we haven't really touched on plugins for the WordPress ecosystem, and it's maybe more of a question for myself.
Yeah, that would be, you would have to answer that.
Yeah.
I understand them to be almost like imported functionality for a very small function, but they have to be, it looks to me like a reasonable amount of work goes into implementing one and making it compatible, but I don't really know.
Yeah, it probably does matter on what the application is for WordPress, but essentially all of the extra functionality that you need or don't need essentially is done via plugins.
Sure.
Right. So they're extra bits of code that are developed and sit on the huge plugin directory that WordPress has. And I think this is part of why a lot of people will use WordPress, is because it's got so much variety. It's been around for so long.
Sure.
People have developed and have fixed bugs in these plugins that essentially, like, a lot of web designers will use as just the base, like, product. They'll spin up a WordPress website and you must have XYZ plugin.
Yep.
You know, and ones that stand out to me are like SEO plugins.
Yep.
So making sure that you're optimizing all your SEO on all your pages and your posts. Things like caching plugins, or almost like a necessity nowadays. You just can't perform without a caching plugin on WordPress. Other things like how to inject code, WP code, all these other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that is where the plugins sit, and that's what you were talking about, that you're
Yeah.
essentially designing one of those, and yeah.
Yeah. I sort of, the thing that's weird to me is the stuff that I have learned how to do is things like making a carousel, or making websites work, or making API calls. Those plugins kind of all exist
to do
unless you need something really, really
Yeah.
specific, and then it's a lot of work to build a plugin where it's doing another, you know what I mean? So
yeah, no, I know.
I
what you
sort of
mean,
understood, and I don't really see the one I got asked to do for a friend, update a WordPress. So the reason you and I sort of talked about WordPress is because I was crossing over into that while I'm trying to find things, ways to pay the bills while I'm figuring out how to make websites. One of the jobs I got, I don't know if I ever spoke to you about it, is the gym needed the timetable updated. It had a timetable plugin that stopped working because they updated Elementor. Yeah. That's it. It just didn't work anymore.
This does happen. This is the problem with plugins, right?
Which led me to believe that the plugin, like, there's a reasonable amount of work that goes into writing and then maintaining one. Because I sort of initially thought, okay, you put a container, you add a class to the container, and then your plugin knows where to put it because you've definitely given it the right thing, and now everything works. It should be straightforward. But then an update to this stops that working. Well, I wouldn't have thought that update could do that, because if you still have the container with the class, how does it die? Okay, that's an interesting problem. So I just parked it. I'm like, okay, it's not easy enough for me to do while I'm doing this other stuff. I'm going to leave it. Compatibility
issues are probably one of the biggest issues I run into, particularly when I take over people's websites.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm taking it over is either they've had a misunderstanding with their agency, or it's been sitting and laying dormant for so long. Maybe, like, a lot of tradies don't want to know about the back end of their website.
Yeah.
It just sits there. And unfortunately, WordPress, built on all of these plugins, need to have these updates. It's just not, you don't have a choice. So if you're not maintaining it, which is why I have a maintenance package for WordPress monthly, I reckon just even once a year, if you were to get in the back there and start updating these plugins. But sometimes they just die. They just, like, the developers don't actually update or fix any bugs with compatibility, and then they just die.
Yeah.
So you've now got a website that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and that's the open source nature of this whole thing, right? So if you go with a block builder, the whole thing is supported by a single organization. WordPress is just so segregated. Different developers for plugins, different theme developers, different block builder developers. So as a web designer, you need to be across the whole ecosystem if you're using WordPress. And I think that's important for tradies to know, or everyone, if they're building with WordPress or their developer is, to make sure what they're using. Are they using quality plugins? Like, I will only use a select few plugins. I'll do a lot of testing on my own if somebody is interested in implementing some sort of functionality before I'll put it into their website. So we'll put it into staging sites and stuff like that, yeah. But yeah, the whole compatibility issue is massive, and I think it's a question that you should be asking your web designer before you get there. Yeah, you start building. Yeah.
So I totally agree with you, and watching the way you've gone about implementing that for the last couple, especially the ones we've collaborated on, it's been interesting to me because you did choose a builder and you kind of didn't interface something that didn't work. You found a way to make it all go together. I think that's missing from some of the things that, in some of the sites, you've inherited some, I've inherited some, to help people. You get a friend who says, hey, our stuff's not working, you jump in and you think, well, this is pretty disjointed. Why did it get built like this?
Exactly, yeah.
And there may have been a good reason at the time, maybe, but Occam's razor and whatever. So I think if you implement it well, where you've thought about how the things go together and checked them off, but then you have this problem of stuff stops working.
Yeah.
Even really, so a WooCommerce plugin stopped working on a site that I help a friend out on, and I can't figure out how to get it working.
I mean, WooCommerce is the biggest plugin, I would suggest.
Right.
Yeah, like in size
100%.
and functionality.
Yeah. And I would say probably most broadly supported.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to know their market share, but
Yeah.
I would say it would be very heavily supported and updated.
And say you essentially creating an e-commerce store. WordPress doesn't have that.
No,
so
right.
WooCommerce is a plugin that provides that functionality.
And I think probably the biggest one, is it, on WordPress sites?
It is the only one that we use.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, no, it won't be the only one, I guarantee it.
Oh, okay.
It is the only one that people use.
Okay, great. So it did seem like the biggest and best one at the time.
Yeah.
Documentation's really good. I went through the documentation. I went through the support sites. Because it is big and open source and been around for a long time, there is quite good support, seems like, for WordPress.
Yeah.
As long as, the problem is if it's too abstracted, you just can't see enough about it. And obviously WooCommerce isn't going to be like, yeah, here's our source code, dig through it.
And that's the overall issue with this whole ecosystem that we're in, right? Building it from scratch, sure. I mean, I couldn't even imagine building an e-com store from scratch, like what you would have to go through.
Yeah.
The structure, like the planning to make sure everything's set up correctly.
Right.
Whereas sometimes...
But conversely, you can just interrogate the object that the API returns and see what it looks like before you push it to your page. So
that's very true.
There's advantages and disadvantages.
Of course, right? Yeah. So from your perspective,
sure,
as a web developer,
what
advice would you have for tradies wanting to get a website, or maybe they want to get an upgrade on their website? How do you see yourself fitting in there, and what do you think the best advice is for them?
That's a tricky question. I think a lot of people are caught out looking for something to look really a particular way, or very flash, or have a certain... You need to, if something's going to be built with lots of features, they have to be pretty thin to still be fast. And I think I don't even look at a web page if it doesn't load. I don't know. You're probably the same, right? If
there's a lot of data out there to suggest.
Back.
Yeah, you're gone. Yeah.
I'm not wasting my time. If you can't make a page that works, I'm like, yeah, it's probably going to be full of ads. I don't want to see it. So, and people, I think, the other one that's really important is layouts should be easy to read and not. I remember that one I sent you for the person said, can you build me a site? I love this example. And I sent you the link. And it's just a wall of text. It probably looked okay.
It was great. I was like, really? Is she taking the piss? What's going on here?
I wasn't sure either. I had to message and say, this example you've just sent me, is this really what you want? Because this is just literally black and white text for pages on scroll. It's like when you see people sharing threads of like, oh my God, someone sent me an essay, I couldn't believe it. On desktop, it was like a pretty big block of text. On mobile, everything's condensed. It's this wide. And I was like, Oh my God, really? You know, and people want to just find what they want to find. They want it quick and easy.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say. I haven't been selling a lot of websites to people. I've been sort of solving small problems at this stage. Things like you've come to me and said, hey, how do we fix this? And had a couple of people who said, I'm having this problem, can you help? But I haven't worked out what that is. But I think you really need to do a bit of research, work it out. SEO is not just about having the keywords on your website anymore. I found that out, you know, by...
Big time, yeah.
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 Make it accessible, make it obvious. I mean, anyway, it's a better question for you. You're more across how you market, how you tell a story, how you present your information in a way that makes someone compelled to get involved.
I think that's on page once you get there, right?
Yeah.
You know, but talking about being able to get there first is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, but again, that's more where you fit in,
Yeah.
about how you direct people in front of your content.
Yeah, you're
think
coming
that's
in
a
from the
bigger
very
problem.
technical side, and I'm coming in from the other end.
Yeah.
You know, as the designer and the SEO side, right?
I guess my question, just to finish my answer before I ask you.
Yeah.
That I would say your site doesn't need to be that crazy. Make it fast. Make it present. You want it to look nice, but you don't need. Just make it fast so that it pops up quick and people don't feel like they're being screened or whatever, and too much data's being captured. Whatever it is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Make it easy to get to. But then I think the side that you came from is more important, honestly. How do you get it in front of people first?
If you're worried about the design, I think you should potentially be thinking about the construction of it first. If they come to you and they say, we're going to build this website using GoDaddy, I want people's ears to prick up and go, well, hang on a second. Why are we using GoDaddy? Why aren't we using WordPress? And if we're using WordPress, why is it? Right. So for me, I think we would break this into two separate camps. And I think if you were to build a new website and your designer comes to you and says, we're going to be using WordPress, I want them to ask, well, what is it about WordPress that you like, and what do you think that we're going to be, how are we going to be using it in the future? Because essentially WordPress is infinitely more scalable than what a builder is going to be on the other side. Plus, it really does lend itself to that SEO side, right? So, and which is what you were talking about. So the SEO plugins really do make it a lot easier for you to scale on SEO, be found on Google a lot easier. So I think they're the questions I would like them to ask. But if you're talking about loading quickly, what you see first, I can give some tips on that specifically.
Sure.
Right. So don't go too crazy, like you said.
Yeah.
Right. Is some really good evidence to suggest that your header text and your call out should be on the left-hand side, because you all read from left to right.
Sure.
An image on the side related to what it is. So you've got your two parts. This is on desktop. Mm-hmm. Hopefully with a face. Faces convert a ton more than what anything else does. So if you've got a person, yeah. That's why I have my own face. I'm ugly, but it's a face. So you've got that layout, and if you're looking on camera, it's like, this is your content, where you've got your header, you've got description, and then you've got call to action. You've got an image here, and then if we move to mobile, it's like that.
Text first.
Yeah, text first.
Text and then image.
And very simple text, like what do you do? If you're a Sparky, I'm an electrician. Servicing Croydon, whatever it is. So I think there's just some very, very simple tips that you can start with. That's just above the fold.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. The above the fold stuff seems like a really good place to concentrate.
It's the majority of because that's where people first land, right?
Yeah.
Above the fold is what you first see in the viewport.
Statistically, do you know how many people travel beyond that?
I have no idea.
It's an interesting question.
That would be an interesting stat to look at.
How well do you convert to a scroll? I wonder if anyone's measured that. They would have. They measure everything. Yeah.
Well, I know that I do measure a lot of things. Like scrolling is just one of those default things in Google Analytics that you get to look at. Your page scrolls. I don't know.
Oh, have you looked at it?
I should
scrolls?
look.
That's
No, I
interesting.
haven't.
Because that could be a really big conversion.
Yeah, it could be. And how far they go. So in Tag Manager, we'll get a bit deep now, but essentially Tag Manager, you can set up any actions that come through.
Yeah.
So it triggers like how far they scroll on the page, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Because if you know that if a certain call to action is a third of the way down the page.
Yeah, and that's where all your bounces are. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can get to there because they may not click, but what you're showing them might be triggering them to leave, right?
Yeah.
So there's some really cool stuff that you can do.
It's really, I think people, it's really double-edged sword. I'm really interested in how they do this.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a little bit scary too to think. I think a lot of people don't realize that like bouncing from something is still data, or saying no to something, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of scary how much they have.
They've got a lot of stuff there.
Dude, the picture they form of your habits is, even if you're not telling them stuff, clicking on things, they're still getting a good idea. Like you said, most people leave here. You left at that point, they can form some sort of, it's a worry.
And if it's available to us as a consumer.
Yeah, I know, imagine what they've got.
Exactly, right? The amount of data that they have. We were talking about this with Google Ads.
Right.
And how we've switched to more of an algorithm, AI-based, search platforms. And it's just crazy how much data they have. But I don't think we could fully understand like the breadth of what they're doing. So, and they all just shove it into this AI and you're like, well, what's the AI doing?
Yeah, same thing. Anytime it's abstracted, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Fear what we don't know.
Yeah. All right, so Stewie, so where to from here?
I have kept things really open-ended. My goal is to become a full-time developer. Well, my goal is to be developing full-time around teaching. I love teaching kids jiu-jitsu. It's fun, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I want to go. And one day I'll want to have my own gym and all that stuff. But I want to be, the way I intend to support that habit, let's face it, is as a web developer. So right now the next big goal is to get, even if it's a typo correction, is to get something accepted to a project.
Okay.
Which is really hard to see what that'll be at the moment from outside. But, there's a lot of encouragement out there.
So where can people find you if they want some custom code from Stewie?
You probably have to find me on GitHub. That's probably the only place, which is probably not the best place. I don't have at the moment.
Contact List Media and I'll get you in contact with Stewie for an affiliate feed.
Affiliate feed. No, look,
all right, I'll filter out all the people that want your code, and if it's any decent code, I'll forward it on.
Well, the rest of them are going to get a WordPress site from you. Yeah, no, that's all right.
Well, Stewie, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks. It's always fun to catch up.
The Digital Tradie podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Righto, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Also, I did not get to the tech tool of the week. I think I was just too engrossed in the conversation. So I spoke to Stu, and his tech tool is GitHub. Not that many of you probably will be using it. Well, I say this every week, but I hope that you would like and leave a review on this podcast. This just helps me get some really awesome guests on. Also, make sure you share this with your mum. This has been the Digital Tradie Podcast. I am David List, and until next time, make sure you are creating some legendary content.